Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news, and congratulations to the Ferrari Strategy crew for taking what could have been an incredibly entertaining championship fight and throwing it away and becoming a one-horse race at the front of the grid. Leclerc is not happy at all about the way today has gone. Should he have made a different decision in the car, knowing what the Ferrari team generally do in situations like this? Seems more despondent than angry today, but we're definitely going to talk about his reaction to the strategic decisions in the coming minutes. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in a comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you are new as always. Let's talk about the start of the race. It was Russell who got away well into turn 1, led I believe 31 laps at the start of this race. Verstappen actually got a pretty bad start, was boxed in a bit. Perez got the better start of the two Red Bulls, but kind of for some reason 2 corners later it was Verstappen who was ahead of Perez. Hamilton had another monster start for 2 weekends in a row, managed to get both Alpines, which is massive, right, because I thought the DRS trains here could be an issue for the cars stuck behind. Turned out that really, apart from the 6 cars, finally we had 6 cars actually competing for the race victory today, which was great fun, or at least competing for podiums, but everyone else was absolutely nowhere near the pace of the front runners. They were getting lapped again and again, it seemed, especially as the middle part of the race came into effect. But yeah, the Ferraris were quick on the first stint. It was interesting the tyre choices that teams went for. So both Ferraris started on the mediums, as did Hamilton, as did most teams. Some drivers though started on the softs. Russell went for them. Verstappen and Perez apparently were struggling to get temperatures even into the softs on the warm-up lap, and they were due to apparently start on the hards according to Christian Horner, but then they decided that, okay, yeah, we want to use the softs because we're struggling to get temps. We think the softs might last a bit longer, so they made a great strategic call. You've got to give credit to Red Bull and Max Verstappen really today, because they always deliver the goods strategic-wise, like pit stops. They seem to nail them every time and just barely make any mistakes, that entire team. The same could certainly not be said for who are technically their championship rivals, but soon there might be a different team in second place in the championship, as we shall see. So obviously Hamilton makes the good start, eventually gets past Norris as well. Verstappen takes Alonso. I thought honestly the Ocon-Alonso train might be able to hold Verstappen back, but Alonso made a mistake. Kind of funny really, because Alonso was defending like a lion last year, right, on this track against Hamilton, and this year he was just seemingly letting everyone through, and eventually Hamilton manages to take Norris, even though Verstappen was closing in quickly onto this battle, and eventually gets the job done. Despite a weird issue early on with the clutch, I was wondering whether any issues might well recur again for Verstappen, who at the start of the day changed around his engine, I think his power unit, because he had an MGU-K failure, I believe, in yesterday's qualifying. That does definitely put him on the precipice of potential penalties, but seemingly even if he goes to P10 or something, doesn't seem to affect him too much if the Ferraris are doing what the Ferraris do. Now this was a kind of key turning point in the race here, because both Alpines came out of the pits. They thought, okay, we'll do a stint on mediums, we'll go to the hards, and we'll try and make it to the ends, which honestly might have worked. The problem was that the hards were just a terrible tyre. Cold conditions, 30 or so degrees colder than it was out there on Friday, and it was immediately obvious that the hard tyre was not it for this race. I mean, they were kind of battling amongst each other, and Riccardo just swoops up the inside with far more grip, takes both positions immediately, and I mean, yeah, the hard tyre was obviously not working right. I thought every team was looking at this, kind of like what happens back in Bahrain when Hamilton went onto the hards and in the first corner he went off the track, right? Like, it was a similar situation where the hards just seemed to get no grip, and even as the laps progressed, like, surely Ferrari and all the other teams were looking at these hard tyres on the Alpines and saying, wow, okay, even after a few laps with the warm-up, they're not getting any quicker. So the hard tyres out of the window, and the degradation didn't seem to be particularly high on the mediums either. Now, at the front of the grid, Leclerc was really rapid on the mediums, right? They did a stop early on. They both ended up on the mediums, and Leclerc had much more pace than anyone on track at this point, apart from maybe Verstappen, who was kind of holding him at bay to a certain degree. But especially given where we thought Ferrari would be with their pace earlier in the weekends, I expect them, to be honest, to be a far quicker car than even the Mercedes up front. Russell held him back for a long time, eventually gets done, but Sainz didn't really have the pace of Leclerc either. So at this point, lap 31, Leclerc's in the lead, extending that lead significantly up to like 4-5 seconds. But Verstappen is making progress behind. He pulled the undercut on Hamilton with the intelligent decision, I think, from Red Bull to put the soft on at the start, helped them out when they went quite long on that to 16 laps, pitted, ended up ahead of Hamilton. Verstappen was putting the pressure on. He then pitted for a second set of mediums. So the way it was working, what was a great decision from Red Bull as well, is that they started on the softs, which meant that they could go mediums to the ends. Because the Ferraris started on the mediums, they couldn't go mediums because you have to run at 2 different tyre compounds in the race, otherwise you get disqualified. So they had to put some other tyre on it that wasn't a medium at some point. They pitted for the mediums first time round to cover off the undercut, which was fine as long as they were going to go to the end of the race and then put the soft on, which is exactly what Lewis Hamilton did in a very, great strategy really for Mercedes that delivered the results. But for some reason, I think their idea here, Ferrari, was to do kind of what they did in Austria, right? point when Verstappen would pit, and then one lap later, they'd bring the leader into the pit, and then, okay, Verstappen might be ahead with the undercut, but then they'd have more pace with the faster tyres, or like with the younger tyres, to get Verstappen back. That's what they did around Austria. Worked out pretty well for Ferrari around there until the engine failure, so they could just never get a clean weekend. I thought they had the same idea here, right? Verstappen pits, okay, let's bring Leclerc in, make sure that he can maybe maintain that position. The problem was that bringing Leclerc in as they did, they couldn't put him on the mediums, right, as Verstappen was, because that would have been illegal if they want to go to the end of the race. So they had to put the hards on if they wanted to do that, which makes the decision so bogus because you just know that the hards weren't going to work and Verstappen was going to smoke him. Now, whether the hards come in after a few laps and he can get the position back with the mediums falling off at the end of the race, that must have been their hope, but it seemed very unlikely. So Verstappen comes around, it's like Leclerc's on the hards, what is this? Takes him incredibly easily on the first lap, then he does a 360 spin out of turn 13, and he allows Leclerc the lead back, and I was like, wow, Verstappen spun, okay, what's he playing at? Manages to save it, obviously, but still doesn't give up a massive amount of advantage. It does seem like when Verstappen makes mistakes, they are particularly costly mistakes compared to Leclerc's mistakes, for example, last week in France, but still, a few laps later, Leclerc's tyres still weren't warm enough, and he was just saying, look, these tyres are an absolute disaster, the tyres are terrible. He was absolutely fuming on the radio, and who can blame him, right? The tyres were giving him no grip, everyone else behind him was closing in rapidly, and of course this comes to mind, right? Okay, you know, what were we doing here, Ferrari? We've done it again. In fairness, the car didn't really have the pace today, but if they made intelligent strategic calls and did what Mercedes did, say, look, Verstappen's going to close in quick on those new mediums, but Leclerc, just go long, you're looking good on these medium tyres, go long until about lap 50 or so, then we'll pit for softs, and then we'll bring you into the end of the race, just what Hamilton did, and of course worked out well. They decide not to do that. Charles is like, look, these tyres are a disaster, I have no grip, and was losing probably a second plus a lap to Verstappen. It was an absolute disaster for Ferrari, so managing to throw away what should have been probably at least a guaranteed double podium with the way the grid was lining up, into no cars on the podium and losing points in both championships. Like, how has that happened? From P2, P3 go on the grid versus P10, P11 on the grid to somehow lose points in both championships is like, what is going on here? Now, Hamilton was flying at the end of the race, right? There's few things more scary in Formula 1 than hammer time at the end of a race when Lewis is on a new set of softs and he's banging in fastest lap after fastest lap. Took a 10-second gap to Sainz, back to like 0 seconds within about 5 or 6 laps, bombed it past Sainz, took out Russell as well a few laps later on dying mediums. Like, a great race from Hamilton, it must be said. If he didn't start P7 as he did, he could have won this race, there's no doubt about it. But at this point, the gap was rapidly closing between Hamilton and Sainz, ends up taking that out, but Leclerc, like, even on a new set of softs, it was strange to me really that Leclerc on those softs didn't get them quite fired up as well as Hamilton did, because Leclerc, you'd have thought, would have smoked Perez in a similar situation. New set of softs right at the end, catch up to Perez, take him out, like, well, not necessarily take him out, but at least overtake him for the 5th place, but he couldn't even get him right, and the late VSC didn't help them either, but Hamilton made up a couple of places, and we actually get the same podium as last time out in France, which is kind of remarkable given the way the race started. And yeah, Leclerc's race in a picture pretty much sums things up, as you guys can see on screen. And just to finish things off, then Hamilton on those softs gets Russell in the ends, and then Bottas goes out of the race, virtual safety car. The rain was coming down, but just about with enough time to spare for Verstappen to hold on with those old mediums. And that's the thing, right? They went softs, mediums, mediums. Certainly, Leclerc could have gone mediums, mediums, softs. That's what Hamilton did. It would have been a perfectly valid, viable strategy. And let's say at the end of the race, the softs didn't work quite so well for Leclerc as they did for Verstappen, let's say, and maybe Leclerc doesn't have the pace at the end of the race to complete the overtake after Verstappen would have done the undercut in that sense. But even if so, Leclerc would have been P2 on the podium, not losing massive grounds, whereas, I mean, look, you can see what happened on the screen. One thing of note here before we look at the drivers' reactions, I did just want to mention Perez, right? Because Perez, again, for the second race in a row, way off the pace of his teammate Verstappen in qualifying, in race pace as well. And questions are, I'm sure, going to be raised about this whole flexi floor thing, because there has been a rumour going around, not sure if this is substantiated at all, but from Spa, the new technical directive comes into play, where the flexi floor exploit, which apparently Red Bull and Ferrari are using to gain advantage, is going to get outlawed. Rumour has it, potentially, that Perez might have been using the new version without the flex in it, which is obviously what they're going to have to use from Spa, probably to like get them more data, I guess would be the theory behind that rumour. Now, if Perez is actually, because he went from being so close with Verstappen pretty much every race for the first half of this year, to now being about, what, 0.5 of a second off the pace, so definitely something to keep your eyes on that we might talk about here in the coming days. But yes, double Mercedes podium, I'm sure we'll talk about that more as well, but again, the Ferrari disaster class comes through in full force, and as we said, they go from P2, P3 down to P10, P11, and I mean, all the other drivers were mind blown as well. They were saying, you know, on the hard, wait, why was he on the hard? Like, they were watching the VOD back, or they were watching the race back here on the telly, and they were like, wait, hang on a second, he was on the hard tyre? What were they thinking, right? Because because I'm sure even they realised the hard tyre was not the way to go. And yeah, just some immediate reaction here from Charles Leclerc especially. He does seem pretty despondent, right, saying it was an absolute disaster at the end of the race, the tyres weren't working, and say that his plan would have been to stay out longer.
I understand the thought behind putting the hard because I felt very strong on the medium. Everything was under control, and yeah, for some reason I don't know what we did to go on the hard, so I don't know.
Did you say on the radio that you didn't want to? Did you ask them if you could go on the medium?
Yeah, I said on the radio that I was very comfortable with the medium and that I wanted to go as long as possible with those tires because the feeling was good. But yeah, I don't know why we took a different decision.
Where did Carlos said the pace wasn't there today either? Where did the pace go today? Do you have any idea? Or
honestly, the pace on my side, I was pretty happy. The only thing is that obviously everybody will remember the last part of the race where it was a disaster for me, especially the hard. That's where I lost the race, basically. I lost 20 seconds with the pit, another maybe 6 seconds on 5 laps on the hard because I was just all over the place with this tire. And yeah, that's where we lost our race. Oh yeah, I don't know.
So as he says, right, the feeling was good on those medium tyres in that second stint where he was pulling away from George Russell. I don't understand, he says, why we did what we did. And this is one of the things, right, I feel like other drivers, like, I mean, even Carlos Sainz we saw recently, or, you know, Michael Schumacher or something, like, they wouldn't just be listening to the team radio and saying, okay, yeah, you say we should pit for the hards, let's do it, right? Like, I think other drivers would be more aggressive on the radio, right? If you're Charles Leclerc, you know this team's a bit dodgy at times. Like, you've got to take matters into your own hands. That's my opinion, at least. If you feel good on these mediums, and the team's telling you to box, like you're saying, hang on a second here, explain this decision to me real quick. I'm going to do one more lap and you're going to explain why we're doing this, what tyre you're putting me on, because Leclerc surely should know that if they went to the hards, that's not going to work, right? He's the guy in the car. He knows if the hards are going to work or not better than the team does. So I just think that, you know, there's an element of Charles Leclerc's character as a driver that needs some refining there, because I do think that a Verstappen or a Hamilton would not just have, you know, listened to the team blindly, especially a team like Ferrari, and said, okay, let's do what you want to do. Like, they would have wanted a good explanation as to why, especially given what they feel in the car. So I think that's something Leclerc's got to think about here, because he seemed more sad today than angry, to be honest. Even this was noticed right afterwards, where George Russell comes up to Leclerc and says, you know, unlucky mate. And I think even Leclerc said, I don't know, in reply to George, right? Whether he was saying, I don't know if it was unlucky, or whether it was just terrible strategy for my team, or whether he was like, man, I don't know what's even going on anymore. But yes, this image certainly came to mind after the race. We talked about this a few days ago, that Mattia Binotto said, you know, why can't we win 10 races till the end? We talked about some of the reasons why just a few days ago, and they've done it again today. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.